Welcome to the Nonfiction Insights channel. Today, we're diving deep into Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs. So where do we start? The beginning seems crucial.
Definitely. His early life feels incredibly formative, starting with his adoption by Paul and Clara Jobs. Clara had been married before, wanted a quieter life, apparently. And they really wanted kids, eventually adopting Steve after facing difficulties with pregnancy. It sets an interesting stage, doesn't it?
It really does. And you contrast that with his birth mother, Joanne Schiebel. Her family was strict, disapproved of her relationship with Abdul Fattah John Jandali. So this initial separation, the whole circumstance of his birth, you have to wonder how that played into his identity later on.
Well, it's hard to know for sure, isn't it? But you could see how maybe that experience being given up might have fostered this deep need to, you know, control his own destiny, shape his world.
Like a drive to prove something.
Perhaps. Or just that feeling of maybe not quite belonging in a conventional sense, fueling this ambition to create something massive, something defining.
Then there's his adoptive dad, Paul Jobs.
Yeah.
He seems really significant, introducing Steve to electronics, tinkering with cars, trips to junkyards for parts.
Yeah, that hands-on stuff. And apparently those junkyard finds helped fund Steve's college fund.
Amazing. What kind of skills or, mindset do you think Steve got from his dad's approach, that tinkering and bargaining?
Well, the practicality jumps out. It wasn't abstract theory. It was, taking things apart, seeing how they worked physically, that tangible understanding, plus the bargaining. It's an early lesson in value in how to acquire things. Pretty useful in business, right?
Sure is. And then there's the environment. Their neighborhood had these Eichler homes.
Ah, yes. Simple, modern designs, kind of aimed at the everyman.
Right. Floor-to-ceiling glass, open plans. It's fascinating how those clean lines, that user-focused design, might have subtly shaped his aesthetic sense way back then.
That's a really compelling connection. That whole Eichler idea, design for living, simplicity, function, it really does echo what Apple later aimed for.
So maybe his appreciation for design wasn't just about tech. It started with the spaces people lived in.
Seems plausible. It wasn't just about circuits, it was about the feel, the look, the experience.
And this was happening in early Silicon Valley, booming because of military investment, neighbors who were engineers.
The perfect storm, really.
His fascination with tech started super early. That visit to NASA Ames, seeing his first computer terminal, he called it love at first sight. How crucial was that environment?
Oh, hugely catalytic. Being surrounded by that innovation, by people pushing boundaries, it makes ambitions seem normal. It exposes you to possibilities. That terminal wasn't just a glance, it planted a seed.
The book also mentions him finding out about his adoption, feeling maybe smarter than his parents, leading to this sense of being, detached, separate.
Mm-hmm. But his parents were also really supportive of his intellectual needs, even if they felt different.
Yeah. How might that feeling of being different, maybe even an outsider, have impacted him, his relationships, his view of himself?
It's often a double-edged sword, isn't it? Feeling like an outsider can be isolating, but it can also fuel that drive to prove yourself, to forge your own path. For Jobs, it seems like it definitely contributed to his intensity, his unwillingness to just conform.
He skipped grades too, which put him in a tougher social spot at Crittenden Middle School.
Right. Not easy. But then a neighbor, John McCollum, nurtured his electronics interests.
Which led to the Hewlett-Packard Explorers Club, exposure to real engineers, early computers like the 9100A, and that summer job at HP with Bill Fernandez.
A real immersion.
So you've got these challenging social dynamics mixed with really stimulating intellectual stuff. What's the takeaway from that mix?
It probably toughened him up, reinforced his focus on what actually interested him. Maybe the social awkwardness made him more independent, less worried about fitting in, while the HP stuff validated his passion and gave him real-world chops early on.
Okay, let's shift a bit. Early 70s, he gets really into spirituality. Be Here Now, Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, alongside friends like Daniel Kotke and Chris Ann Brennan, exploring spirituality, psychedelics.
And Robert Friedland, with his intense conviction about enlightenment being attainable. How did that whole spiritual quest, feed into his later work, his innovation?
It seems like it instilled this belief in intuition, looking beyond the obvious. That focus on maybe mindfulness, seeking deeper meaning. Perhaps that translated into envisioning products that weren't just functional, but resonated emotionally, almost spiritually, with users.
Interesting. Then comes Atari, where he was, let's just say, a difficult colleague.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Don Lang had issues with his hygiene, his personality. Nolan Bushnell had to put him on the night shift.
Known for being blunt, calling colleagues dumb shits.
Apparently so. He held this incredibly high standard, maybe ruthless even then. It shows that uncompromising nature, that impatience, even early on.
But it pushed people too, maybe.
Luckily, that intensity, while abrasive, probably did push people around him to perform better, or maybe just get out of his way.
And at Atari, he designed Breakout. He brought Wozniak in, right? With that incentive for using fewer chips.
That's the story. A bonus if was used under 50 chips.
But the story also goes that Jobs wasn't exactly upfront with Woz about how big that bonus actually was.
Yeah. That's an early glimpse of a certain ruthlessness, perhaps. He saw Woz's brilliance, clearly, but handling the bonus like that, it suggests his own gain was paramount, even with a close friend.
Kind of transactional.
It hints at that. The end goal justifying the means, perhaps.
Which leads us right into Apple's birth. Those homebrew computer club meetings with Wozniak.
The perfect incubator. Woz's tech genius meets Jobs's, well, vision and drive.
They displayed the Apple I at the Personal Computer Festival, but it didn't exactly blow people away. Lee Felsenstein was unimpressed.
Right. Maybe that initial lukewarm reception pushed them, made them realize technical skill alone wasn't enough. They needed something more.
And to the Apple II, a huge leap. And Jobs was adamant about the design, simple, elegant, inspired by, of all things, Cuisinart food processors.
Yeah. That focus on aesthetics was pretty radical for tech back then.
Why was that so critical, do you think? That design emphasis?
It was a massive differentiator. You had all these clunky, beige, technical-looking boxes. The Apple II looked approachable, maybe even beautiful. Jobs got that people connect emotionally with objects. Good design makes something more appealing, easier to use, even before you power it up.
Even down to employee badge numbers. He wanted number 1, right? Had a whole thing about it. Settled for N0 internally, but number 2 for payroll.
It says a lot, doesn't it? That need for recognition, for symbolic status, it fueled his confidence, reinforced his sense of being in charge, being important.
And that desire for control, it went beyond badges. The Apple II architecture, J. Elliott, wanted an open system. Jobs pushed for closed, proprietary.
And that tension, open versus closed, became a defining Apple thing under Jobs.
What are the trade-offs there? Control versus openness.
Well, the closed system meant tighter integration, hardware, software working perfectly together, a better, more consistent user experience, but it limited third-party stuff, made it less flexible maybe. That was the constant battle.
Then there's the famous Reality Distortion Field. Bill Atkinson's term for Jobs' ability to convince people of almost anything. Was that purely good?
Well, it was incredibly powerful for motivating teams, getting them to do things they thought were impossible, absolutely. But the downside, it could lead to ignoring real problems, setting crazy deadlines, dismissing valid concerns. It could distort reality for him too, not just others.
Perfectionism too. And impatience. Zero tolerance for anything less than perfect. Calling people bozos if their product wasn't perfect. Finding adequacy is sufficient. Morally appalling.
Yeah, really intense. He despised Adam Osborne's portable computer, right? Said he's not making art, he's making shit.
Wow. How did that extreme standard affect Apple's products? Good and bad.
Good. It drove innovation, resulted in incredibly high-quality, polished products. It pushed teams to do amazing work. Bad. Probably immense stress, brutal hours, a really tough work environment for a lot of people. It's a fine line between demanding excellence and just being harsh.
And it wasn't just the surface. The carpenter analogy, using beautiful wood, even for the back of a cabinet, the part no one sees.
Exactly. That idea that quality, the aesthetic, has to go all the way through. It shows this deep commitment to craftsmanship, that every single detail matters for the integrity of the whole thing.
Even tiny things on screen, like the rounded rectangle story after Atkinson's circle algorithm, that level of visual obsession.
Because he knew the interface is the experience for the user. Tiny visual details affect how usable, how delightful a product feels. Meticulous doesn't even cover it.
And this all ties back to that end-to-end control idea. Why he hated licensing the Mac OS, even though Mike Murray suggested licensing to Tandy, which could have meant huge market share.
Right. He feared losing control, standard slipping.
Yeah.
Maintaining that perfect integrated experience was more important than dominating the market share numbers, at least to him.
What were the long-term effects of that decision?
Well, it kept the Mac experience consistent and high quality, for sure. But it also meant Windows, being more open, grabbed way more market share. It shaped the whole PC landscape for decades.
Though he could sometimes admit he was wrong, like with that Sony disk drive for the Mac. He initially resisted, but then thanked the engineers for disobeying him.
Yeah, those moments are interesting. Glimmers of pragmatism. It suggests that ultimately making a great product sometimes won out over his own ego. Sometimes.
Okay, let's talk Scully. Recruiting John Scully from Pepsi.
Okay.
That line is legendary. Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life? Or do you want a chance to change the world?
Classic Jobs. Incredible persuasion, grand vision. He offered people a chance to be part of something huge, something transformative. He made people believe.
They seemed really connected at first, excited.
Yeah, there's definitely a honeymoon period.
But then it fractured. The conflict over the Macintosh price, Scully wanting $2,495, Jobs wanting $1,995. Jobs felt he was losing control, blamed the higher price for slower sales, for Microsoft gaining ground.
That power struggle was huge. It must have deeply affected him, that feeling of losing control over his creation. It probably shaped how he approached leadership later, how determined he was never to lose that control again.
And the rivalry with Bill Gates and Microsoft? Intense. Different views on taste, style, tech
Oh,
skills.
yeah. Gates thought Jobs was fundamentally odd. Jobs thought Gates would be broader if he'd, dropped acid or visited an ashram.
Huh. And Jobs famously said Microsoft had no taste, didn't bring culture to their products.
You're right. For Jobs, tech was art, integrated aesthetic. Gates was more focused on, getting software onto as many machines as possible, market dominance over maybe aesthetic purity. Very different philosophies.
And the whole thing with Microsoft using the graphical interface ideas from Xerox beer.
Yeah, that copying accusation, which, Gates had his own justifications for. Apple had an agreement Microsoft wouldn't make graphical software for others for a year after the Mac launch, but the Mac got delayed.
So the agreement kind of fizzled.
Pretty much. Then Gates announced Windows in late '83. Jobs felt betrayed, reinforcing his view about Microsoft's lack of originality, even though Microsoft ultimately won the OS war.
Then came Jobs' departure from Apple. A really tough period. Selling unsold leases as the Macintosh XL, which he hated. Bob Hoffman resigned over it.
Yeah, desperate times. And Jobs' behavior after being sidelined was apparently quite odd. Leaving gifts in a hotel room after his 30th birthday party. Just seemed to drift.
In his Playboy interview around then, he talked about aging, artistic contribution. He was clearly thinking about legacy.
Definitely. And still thinking about tech. Flat screens, touch screens. Considering a Mac and a book at a skunkworks called Apple Labs. Even in exile, the mind was whirring.
But he lost the power struggle with Scully and the board. His emotions were apparently all over the place afterwards.
Understandably. Moved to an office Scully called Siberia. Apparently disliked Dylan's new album, Empire Burlesque, around that time, too. Just a low point.
Scully told analysts Jobs was irrelevant. Ouch.
Yeah, brutal.
But then he took that trip to Europe. Found those bluish-gray paving stones in Florence. The ones that later inspired the Apple Store floors.
Amazing detail, right? Even in personal turmoil, that design eye was always on, always absorbing. It was just part of him.
And then he announces his plans for next T to the Apple board. Promised it wouldn't compete.
Which turned out differently. He hired Hartmut Esslinger from Frog Design for NextT's look, insisted on free reign, like Paul Rand got.
And insisted the next T computer be a perfect cube, design trumping engineering convenience again.
Classic Jobs move. Aesthetics first. But NextT also bundled cool stuff like the Oxford English Dictionary, Shakespeare, very forward-thinking content-wise.
But it struggled financially. The honeymoon is over in retreat. Then Ross Perot invested.
Yeah, Perot's investment was a lifeline. And then IBM partnered with NextT, which apparently infuriated Bill Gates.
Small world. While all this next T-Smith was happening, he was also involved with Pixar.
Right. He protected that animation group, even when the hardware and software side of Pixar was struggling. He seemed to have a real emotional connection to the magical artistry there.
Funding the short films, like Tin Toy, even when cash was tight, because he was moved by John Lasseter's passion and storyboards.
It shows a different side, doesn't it? Nurturing creativity in a totally different field, not just about circuits and code.
His personal life was complex, too. His relationship, or lack thereof, with his biological father, Jan Lee. No interest in meeting him, partly because of how he treated Jobs' sister, Mona Simpson.
Yeah, despite Jobs' own complicated history with his daughter, Lisa.
Right. That early denial of paternity with Lisa Brennan, then the eventual reconciliation, shows some capacity for change, maybe.
It seems so. Complex dynamics all around. His relationship with his biological mother, Joanne Simpson, sounded draining too, those Christmas visits. But he reassured her he had a great childhood.
And then Laureen Powell. Meeting her, that honest connection. moving in quickly. He said she was the first person he was truly in love with.
She seems to have brought a real stability, a crucial partnership, especially for his later years.
Compared to his earlier intense relationship with Tina Redsea, which didn't work out despite a deep connection.
Different phases of life, different needs, perhaps.
Then marriage to Lorene at Yosemite, insisting everyone arrive by chartered bus.
Huh. Even his wedding had logistical demands. Their home in Palo Alto, the renovations, the pizza oven, creating a family base.
And Pixar's Toy Story premieres. He held his own premiere in San Francisco for the tech crowd, rather than just attending Disney's big Hollywood event.
Always controlling the narrative, the experience.
Okay, the return to Apple. That's the epic comeback. Jean-Louis Gasset surprisingly defended NXT and Jobs, which helped.
Yeah, Gasset's support was unexpected. And Jobs then quietly, or maybe not so quietly, wrested power back from Gil Amelio.
Demanding the board resign right after they approved his options package. That took guts.
Absolutely bold. It showed he was back and fully intended to be in charge, setting his own terms.
One of his first big moves. Calling Bill Gates. Settling the patent lawsuits. Getting Microsoft to commit to developing for the Mac. Even investing in Apple.
A hugely pragmatic decision, necessary for survival.
But that announcement.
Yeah.
Awkward, right?
Yeah.
Gates appearing on that giant screen. Jobs later realized it made Apple look small.
Yeah, visually maybe not the power move he intended, but his message afterwards, that impromptu bit about letting go of the idea that for Apple to win, Microsoft had to lose, that was significant, a necessary truce.
Back in the driver's seat, he brought back that intense focus on innovation and design. Those Wednesday afternoon marketing meetings where he approved every ad.
Total control. And flipping the scripts so design-led engineering, not the other way around. He believed the engineer-driven process led to awful products.
Jony Ive became crucial here.
Absolutely. The Jobs-Ive collaboration was central to everything that came next.
Starting with the iMac, that first great design triumph of the comeback. All in one, distinctive look, hitting that target price, recalling the spirit of the original Mac.
It was a statement piece. Bold colors, translucent case. It screamed, Apple is back and we're different. Even that final blow-up over the CD tray at the launch rehearsal shows his obsession with every detail being perfect.
The behind the scenes, revolutionizing the supply chain with Tim Cook, slashing inventory, speeding up production. That operational side is often forgotten.
But it was absolutely critical. You can design cool stuff, but you need to build it efficiently and get it to people. Cook's operational genius was the perfect foil to Jobs' vision.
He even wanted Sony-style uniforms for Apple employees at one point, to foster bonding.
Yeah, that idea didn't quite take off for everyone, but it shows his thinking about culture, about creating a unified identity.
Fostering collaboration through frequent meetings, but hating formal presentations. More about conversation, argument.
Right. He wanted raw ideas, debates, not polished slideshows.
Then the iPod, hiring Tony Fadell, creating not just a player, but the whole iTunes ecosystem.
That was the genius, the complete system, the device, the software, the store, and convincing the very reluctant music industry to get on board.
A total game changer for music. And his own iPod playlist, lots of Dylan. He even negotiated that exclusive Dylan digital boxed set for iTunes.
His personal passions often intersected with the business.
Even the Pixar building design reflects this. Obsessed with every detail, believing the building itself could foster culture. That central atrium forcing random encounters.
Yeah, Lasseter wanted a more traditional Hollywood studio layout initially. Jobs insisted on the atrium to spark collaboration. He saw the building as architecture-shaping behavior. The Pixar building was Steve's own movie, Isaacson writes.
Wow. Back at Apple, the seamless transition to Intel processors in Macs. Even Bill Gates admired that.
A huge technical feat, managed incredibly smoothly.
His attitude towards money is interesting, too. Publicly taking $1 your salary.
While accepting massive stock option grants. He wasn't against being wealthy, clearly, but cultivated that image of being motivated by the work, not the money.
Then his health battles. Diagnosed with that pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor in 2003.
Yeah. And, tragically, resisting conventional surgery for 9 months, trying alternative therapies instead.
Lorene Powell, friends, pleading with him to get the surgery.
A difficult period? Isaacson links that obstinacy to the dark side of the reality distortion field, maybe. His ability to ignore things he didn't want to confront.
Even during this, innovation continued. The brief, failed partnership with Motorola on the ROK-R phone.
A compromise product, made by committee, everything Jobs hated. It probably reinforced his belief in Apple needing to do the whole thing themselves.
Which led directly to the iPhone. granting that exclusive preview to Time magazine, Grossman's piece highlighting the usability.
A true revolution. And the launch day, him walking into the Palo Alto Apple store greeted like Moses, the culmination of so much.
Then the iPad, rejecting the netbook idea, pushing for a multi-touch tablet instead.
Again, defining a new category. And that core idea behind it, the intersection of technology and the liberal arts, that was key for him.
His relationship with Rupert Murdoch seems interesting too. Dinners at Jobs' house, some funny stories there. Building alliances.
Always working the angles, building relationships that could help Apple.
Introducing iCloud, demoting the PC, making the cloud the hub. Another big strategic shift.
Moving beyond the device itself to the ecosystem, the service.
Personally, wanting desperately to see his son Reed graduate high school in 2010.
Those personal milestones became incredibly important as his health declined in 2011. The pain, medication, loss of appetite, a vicious cycle.
His psychology around food, influenced by years of fasting and diets, complicating things further.
Lorene overseeing his care diligently, but ultimately Jobs made the final calls on treatment. Still meeting doctors, researchers, apparently critiquing their PowerPoint slides even then.
Still being Steve.
Right to the end. That final meeting with Bill Gates. Acknowledging each other's contributions, their different paths to success, integrated versus open. A poignant moment.
After his passing, critiques of Apple's closed ecosystem continued, of course.
But Jobs' rationale was always clear. The integrated approach was the only way, in his view, to create truly great products, to ensure the best user experience, to take responsibility for the whole thing.
So when you boil it all down, what does this deep dive reveal? It's just a portrait of relentless drive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Uncompromising vision, a personality that was, well, brilliant and often ruthless, blurring those lines.
Absolutely. That insistence on perfection, pushing teams beyond what they thought possible, that deep grasp of how creativity and technology connect. It left an undeniable mark.
The book really shows how someone so, frankly, flawed could create things that were so groundbreaking, so beloved. It raises big questions about innovation, leadership, the price of that kind of genius.
Definitely gives you a lot to think about. Hopefully this exploration has offered some new insights, maybe even sparked a desire to dig deeper into his life and legacy.
Please subscribe to the Nonfiction Insights channel.